can you see my?
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, can you see the presenter notes?
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I've broken down digitization into 3 stages. Some archivists will tell you that there's like 5 or 6, but I'm not missing any. I'm just grouping them in broader sections. First is the full scope planning stage. This is the time where you're going to really outline what is being scanned and how. The second is the scanning process and action. And lastly, the mechanism for access and preservation. I've left the 3rd stage more open-ended for all of us to discuss. It's more of a stage for you to think, how does your institution want to provide access and/or preservation? So the first stage of any size digitization project should be creating a project plan. This will scope out what are you planning to do and what are your needs. These needs need to cover resources, technology, and support that you have at hand or need. Identify what you want to digitize and why you want to digitize it. Identify how much material is that. Is that an entire photograph collection, a group of diaries, etc.? Get an estimated count of each individual scan that would be created. Also think about, if you're digitizing correspondence or photographs, are you going to scan the front and back? It's good to make those decisions before you start scanning. This will give you an idea of how to plan for the equipment that you may need, the time that it's going to actually take to do this project, and then also calculate if you need storage needs and have to ask that from IT or purchase your own storage. And all of this should be documented in your project plan. The next is to question, can you even digitize it in terms of copyright, privacy, and ethics? Does the material come with a gift agreement, and does it actually allow you to digitize? For this section in particular, does scanning for access infringe on any of the privacy of your members or congregation views on privacy of events? Also, maybe review copyright concerns that may arise. Always evaluate, the fair use checklist, or for example, review resources like the Digital Preservation and Copyright by Peter Hurdle. And I'm going to show you now a resource that I really like using. This is the fairuse.stanford.edu. This will allow you to, 1, keep updated with any of the news regarding copyright and fair use of scanning. There's also a ton of resources and charts to use. This helps you determine, is this still in copyright? There's resources, there are FAQs. There's also helping you determine what is public domain and what is fair use. So I return. Okay. Can you see my notes? No, okay, great. So I think that we got a hang of this. So I really recommend using that when you're thinking about copyright and privacy. That's a really good resource. The next thing to do is outline the audience. Who's going to actually use these scanned material? How are you going to share it? If it's for the public, do these scans need to have its own interface? Do you have room to put it on your own website? So really think about, before scanning, what are your intentions of the end results? That will sort of help you decide what type of formats to scan, what kind of storage considerations do you have to think about? Are you also planning to preserve these digital objects too? This really gets you thinking about how important the back end is for storage and how much metadata work might be required for the project. So the best example to get you thinking about these steps and the cost and time is something called the Digitization Cost Calculator. which is an incredible tool to see what steps are needed, calculating time and costs, and lets you think about the whole project end to end. So I will show you what that looks like. That is right here. This is the dashboard.diglib.org. And this is a great project that was created by DLF and CLIR. So you go to this website and this lets you do a calculator of how much time and money it's going to cost to do a digitization project. And I will demo sort of an estimate of what that actually looks like. So say you have, your community wants to scan your photograph collection in its entirety. Say you have like a modest collection of 2,000 images. You save and continue. The next stage it's asking is staffing. So who's going to run this project? Well, there's going to be a supervisor for this project and they're salaried and they get $60,000. And then you have an intern that's going to help maybe, and they're hourly and they get paid $15 an hour. But really, who are we going to have help us? It's going to be volunteers. So we have volunteer 1, and they don't have an hourly rate. So this lets you figure out who's going to work on this project. Continue. And as you can see, the breakdown of the menu of that, these are the things you have to think about. How are you going to capture it? How are you going to prepare the material? Who's going to do quality control? How much time is post-processing going to happen? How much metadata creation are you going to do? And then also post-preparation. So we're using photographs, and maybe you don't have equipment yet to do this estimate, but you can always put in what you think is best. So we're using photographs, so the best is to use a flatbed scanner. So we'll select that. And we'll have, really the scanning is going to be done by the intern. So we're going to have the preparation of materials. The first thing you do with preparation of materials is the condition review. Can it actually be digitized? We're going to look at every image and see if it can be digitized, and we'll have a volunteer work on that. We'll also have a volunteer remove any fasteners. Also, we'll have a volunteer do 100% of the sorting, like pooling the material and getting it ready. Now, someone has to do the rights review. Every image is going to be performed with a rights review, and so we'll have the supervisor do that. Next is quality control. How much quality control are you going to do? How many times are you going to check the process that everything's going right? Typically, you do about 20%, and that will be performed by the intern. So we're going to do level 2. Level 1 is the highest, like 100%. Then there's post-processing. This means it's been scanned. Now what's going to be the editing done to that scanned image? Are you going to have to realign or rotate? You probably have to do that with all the images. Cleanup and dust removal, depending on how old it is. Maybe you'll have to do that for each image. Color correction might have to be done. Maybe you have to crop the image. This will have it done by the intern. Then there's the descriptive metadata. How much metadata are we going to do? Let's say we're going to do 100%. We're going to describe every single photograph with a Dublin core complete set. And we're going to have the intern do this. Then there's post preparation. The desorting, meaning organizing the collection back to be putting back on the shelf or refiled. And so we'll have that done by the volunteer. And then here's the other thing. Is there other procedures that your institution needs to do? Like, does, the director need to review the work done? Or, the time it takes to ingest into your storage. So ingest to a DAMS if you have one. And we're going to do that with 100% of the material. And it's how much time does it take for 100 items? So it takes about 10 minutes to upload per 100 items. So we'll save and continue. And here is your digitization estimates. The number of scans is 2,000 scans, and it's actually going to take 3,000 hours to do the entire project, from scanning metadata and ingest into your storage. And this is a total breakdown of how much time each of that's going to be done if you're doing that to every single item. Because as you can see, it is over 3,000 minutes to do the flatbed scanner. And then also like the condition review is going to be 243 minutes. The editing process right here shows you how long it takes. And then here is the total in minutes of how long it's going to do the whole entire project. This also does the cost calculations for you of how much it's going to cost. And this is great for you if you're thinking about, one, how much time it's going to cost or time it's going to take to do the project, but also potentially how much it's going to cost. And you can work out how much time you would have an intern, or even if you're thinking about applying for a grant, this will help you determine how much time and money is that you need to complete this project. So I will return. So you take all these answers and you're writing out now your project goals and needs. This document with these questions answered are great for you to plan in any direction. Even if you end up stalling that it costs too much money or it takes too much time, you have it written down now that you can always go back and refer to it if the situation changes. Be realistic about the work, the space, and the time. A lot for the time of the scanning, but also prepping for the scanning. This is the prep, metadata creation, sorting, editing, all that. More in the nitty-gritty is the need to think about technology. Going back to, do you have the technology for the project? What equipment to scan do you need? Do you have a computer? Do you have storage? What do you have on hand to do that? Depending on the material to scan, the question you have to ask yourself, is it worth buying equipment, outsourcing the project entirely, renting equipment, or looking for a partnership where another institution would do the scanning for you with the sort of agreement that they would put it in their digital library? If you want to buy a new DSLR camera or scanner, know someone else who uses it. Like I said at the very beginning, a good rule is to see what other people are using. It builds a community and it helps with troubleshooting in the future. Think about what format exactly you want to digitize and what formats are required to have it digitized at. If the format is prevalent in the collection, think of it as an investment to your collection for future projects. I always recommend choose a scanning equipment or a camera that can capture multiple formats. Don't buy a book scanner that can't also scan individual manuscripts. Get a flatbed that can do negatives and photographs. There's also the possibility of maybe it's better suited to rent completely. Outsource if you're not looking into building a digitization program. Maybe the equipment in one format is not an investment for a collection. For example, I had 25 16mm reels of film with unknown recordings. Rather than buy equipment to digitize it for such a unique format in the collection that we weren't planning on acquiring any new material in that format, I outsourced it and used a vendor, George Blood, to digitize it. There is also finding, like I said, partnerships where the material can be scanned and the digital objects can be hosted by another institution or consortium. I'll show, for example, let's see. This is Digital Maryland, and this is a collaborative statewide digital preservation program where institutions can get their items digitized, and then Digital Maryland will host the access copies and then provide you the preservation copies, and then we'll also help with the metadata. So this is a great way to get your collections more accessible when you don't have the means to actually enact that process. So as you can see, this comes from all these different libraries and art institutions and colleges. And like I said, look at what other institutions are doing and ask questions on the listservs. I will tell you, it's really important to talk to other people because, for example, one of the pitfalls is in not researching equipment. My institution purchased an Indus book scanner. Indus is not a widely used scanner in North America, academic institutions. So we don't have sister institutions to lean on for help, and we have to pay a lot in annual licensing for the software and servicing fees to maintain it. So troubleshooting, we always have to direct it back to the manufacturer rather than talking to another institution that has had the problem. And one of the things that I always recommend too is when you're thinking about the things you want to scan, if it's paper and photographs and stuff like that, big or small institutions, the most popular is an Epson 12,000 or 11,000 scanner that allows you to scan multiple negatives and photographs and paper at the same time. Another thing in the planning stage is thinking about who is managing the technology. Does your organization have an IT department? Are you a lone ranger in all of this? So purchase equipment if there's technology support. Rely on making sure that there's YouTube video tutorials or that there's readily available information if you end up having to be a lone ranger in the whole process. Don't go over your head if you're the sole administrator and finding yourself being IT as well. Of course, space is crucial. So what are you going to use for your scans and storage? Do you have a place for your master files? Do you have a place big enough to also have the edited images as well as the access copy? That is potentially a lot of space. So you're going to want to estimate the number of scans per megabyte to calculate storage. And having documentation will help you determine those needs. And you're going to want to also know to plan ahead of time what your desired formats are. Here are the best practices of formats. Make sure when you're purchasing technology that the equipment can meet these needs. Think about, do you have the things already on site available to create these formats? You can be a complete novice to scanning specifications. All you have to do is match the best practices numbers to numbers of a scanner online to make sure that they match the minimum resolution and the bit depth. And then also, it doesn't hurt contacting companies and just asking outright, do they meet these best practices? So also knowing the format is also knowing what resolution you want and the depth. And this can also really determine at the very beginning the amount of space you need. So let's do an example of like one TIFF at 24 bytes of a manuscript is 300 megabytes. Times that by that 2,000 scans that I demoed, that's about 600,000 megabytes or 600 gigabytes of space needed just for the masters. So once you have an idea of the material, goals, and equipment, it's time to solidify a plan of how you're going to enact scanning. How are the items going to get from the shelf to being digitized? Who is going to be responsible for what? How much description is needed to be done or has already been done? What are your bare minimum for the metadata? Do you have the resources to create the metadata to meet Dublin Core, METS, MODS, premise, metadata scheme? Deciding metadata before a project will help your object be more detailed and accessible. The best way to do that is also with a spreadsheet where every row is every item and it can detail the metadata to help you link to the scanned object. And then I also like to highlight what is your file naming convention for this project? Think about that before you scan. Files should be well organized and named in such a way that they're easily identifiable and accessible. So don't start your project at 001 or the alphanumeric one given in like a raw camera or scanner that you get, because it's not going to be helpful. File names should contain some type of necessary information that is descriptive in a way that you can go back and find the physical item. So no spaces or special characters. And there's no wrong way really to do it. What's important is consistency and having it planned beforehand before you start having the project done. And also, my biggest recommendation in workflow is not only for it to be detailed, but also create samples and examples of it being done, ensuring that the workflow and the scanning staff has something to follow, something that they can marker that they're doing it right or that they're doing it wrong. And that whoever is supervising a digitization project should know how to do each step. So before I go on to the next section, I'm going to show you some examples of what a project plan can look like.
Okay, Beaudry, this may also be a good time for questions soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you take a break for questions now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anyone have a question for Beaudry before she moves on? Evidently you're answering all our questions as you go along. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay.
Okay, well, write down your questions and Beaudry will get to those at our next break, which will probably be when she concludes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is an example of a project planning guide. And this actually sort of in a sort of question and answer form addresses all the things that I've mentioned. So, you know, what are the goals? Who are the intended audience? What are the potential challenges? So having a project plan that sort of looks like this, yes, very time consuming, but is actually very helpful for you. This also helps you engage in conversation with constituents if they're sort of asking for a little bit more than what you can handle, or they're thinking the timeline is shorter than what you can actually do. So this is a great example of the questions and the things that you should think about and how you should have it outlined when you're doing your project plan. And this is a good part too, is thinking about access, you know, what is the metadata schema that you're going to use? Are you going to use controlled vocabulary? And then this is one that I didn't really speak on, is there any access restrictions that you have to think about? And as you can see, and this is a very broad one, but I can show you one in action So this is from the University of Illinois, and they have their project plan example available. And as you can see, this is the summary. This is the specifications of what their goals are, their cataloging status, how they're going to file name, what equipment they're going to use, what kind of formats do they want to create, what is their preservation requirements and their access requirements. Also, where are these files going to go? So there's a lot of templates online to help you create a project plan if you're sort of stuck on sort of, well, what is it supposed to look like? In essence, it's supposed to look like whatever provides the most information for you and your organization. Let's see. So I'm going to go into stage 2, which is actually the work in action, doing the scans. If you're working with non-archival people, library people, if it's mostly volunteers, especially students, you have your project plan. Now you're going to have to train. Think about training in 2 ways. One is verbally, hands-on, as well as also have a document version. And I'm sure we all know using archival jargon and acronyms will not be helpful to train the skill levels in which you'll have help. So have guides that are incredibly explicit for each step, even on how you turn on the computer, what software to open. This is really time consuming, but very worth it if you do it in the beginning. This also allows you to sort of pause the project at any time, because especially if you're using volunteers and students, that workflow may be stop and go as, you know, volunteers come and go and schedules change. This allows you to pick up where you left off. So implementing the workflow is grabbing the material, how to position the scan, edit, and where to save. Because you're documenting all of this, this will be helpful. And then I also added quality assurance as a step, because as these scans are happening, whoever is supervising a digitization project should check in periodically and make sure that the metadata or the file names are correct to the images that are being scanned, because you certainly don't want at the end doing quality control and seeing how much, you know, might have gone awry. So periodically checking allows the project to keep running smoothly. And then lastly, of course, where are you going to put the things that you scan? You should have a project folder that includes a folder of the scans, the folder of the metadata, as well as a folder of the project information, which includes the project plan. And save that in one spot. And then from there, when you finish your project, create the duplicates for your preservation needs and your backup needs. I personally do for my digitization in the university archives is we make them scans and we save them to the cloud, and then we also save it to an external hard drive. And sort of this is the steps, as you can see from beginning to end in the scanning phase. And it sort of looks like this. Here's an example of a student assistant scanning an item, then adding the information to the metadata fields in a spreadsheet. And what links the image that's being scanned is the object ID number, which is also the file name of the image. So we know where the image description is and what it's linked to. At Villanova, like I said, we require a Dublin core set, so you can see the final product in our distinctive collections digital library. So now your material has been scanned, you have the metadata, you are at stage 3, and your material needs to be accessible. You may have this in an may need this just in an organizational drive that everybody internally needs to have access to, or maybe you want to make this material public. And not all organizations have IT that can build from the ground up a digital repository. So I wanted to also mention some free online tools for public access. There's Omeka, which you can create digital exhibits as well as a digital library of the things you
I
see.
am so sorry to interrupt, but we haven't seen your slides since the beginning of stage 2.
Oh, well, I've seen them. Sorry. Let's do this. Okay. Okay, do we see it now? Yeah. Okay. Today's just not my day for Zoom. It's not happening. Okay. Let me go back. So just to go back, I apologize. So stage 2, this is what it looks like for scanning. Here are the steps. And then here's this in action. This is my student Anna who's scanning a Villanova College schedule. And above is an example of what our metadata fields look like. We capture the digital object ID, which is the file name, to the thing that we've scanned so that they're connected. And then we also have information like the title, date, description, what type it is, and the subject headings that we use. And to go back to where I am now is the free online tools to create public access. If you're really doing this on your own and you don't have the budget to sort of create from the ground up, is there's omeka.org. There's also WordPress. And the one thing to say about WordPress is it's free to use, but if you want to use special plugins and have it very elaborate, there tends to be a cost associated to that. There's also the collective access, which does collection management for you. And then lastly is resources. I have a list of, the recommended formats for scanning, as well as a handbook for digital projects, which kind of goes over what I went today, but something that you can read over in more detail. Then there's also the guidelines for archival material for electronic access. This talks about sort of how do you provide accessible images. Of course, then we also have more the FADGI, which is the Federal Agency Digital Guidelines Initiative, which provides best practices for scanning all different types of material. And then a couple that I like to highlight is if you're really doing this by yourself, there's a really good DIY book scanner that you can learn how to create a book scanner on the fly with some material. And then this is also a link to digitalpreservationarchiving.com, which will provide different types of scanners to look into, to purchase, to think sort of what's on the market, what's accessible for your institution. So that concludes. I'm going to officially stop sharing because apparently I keep doing that. And I'm open for questions, concerns. And then I'd also ask and open the floor, is anybody currently working on a digitization project or thinking about one right now? Yes, Tom.
We're working on a few different digitization projects. Really appreciated your presentation. It's really helpful.
Thank you. And I see in the chat, do you know of a similar cost calculator for microfilming? That's actually a very good question. I don't. And I think that's more of the case that the action of creating microfilm is very much outsourced. But that's actually a really good question. I wonder if the Digital Library Federation is thinking about adding that to the calculator, because that certainly is a component to think about. And then Michelle, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, I will send out at the end the PowerPoint because you guys didn't get to see most of it. And then Benjamin asks, can you provide an example of file name conventions for bound manuscripts with multiple pages front and back, recto verso? For example, would it work to have the call number plus the extension and the page numeration? Yes, yes. Your example, MS_220_1R is exactly actually how we scan bound material, is that we have page one, and especially if it's not numbered, that's exactly how we do it.
Great, thank you.
I see that Nancy has her hand up.
Yes, I am working with a small foundation, and we're wanting to digitize not so much to make it accessible, but to protect it from fire. It's in a historic building. And so just could you address that? Is there anything we need to know if we're not going to need a lot of data to put it somewhere, or how that works?
Yeah, I think what you're doing is you're really eliminating the need of like access ability, like creating access. So what you're really creating is storage. You know, if you ever come across like Amazon storage, Amazon Glacier is a storage that is a dark archive. And a dark archive means what you've sort of detailed. You're scanning for preservation in the event of a disaster, but you're not going to actually use those scanned items for the foreseeable future. So you're charged the storage, and then you're charged to take it back because you won't use it a lot. But that's one way to think of it. It's what you're thinking of is, rather than thinking about creating access, you're creating preservation. And especially if it's going to be internal, maybe just creating the master copy is enough, where you don't have to create edit and then you have to, you know, create an access copy to that. Maybe just the master is enough. And then thinking about making sure that it's in 3 different places for storage, especially in the event of disaster. And that actually is most frequently what I get asked. I'm also part of the Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia. And we're just a group of archivists that help community activists, you know, preserve their own materials. And that's their number one question, is that they're not necessarily ready to make anything public, but they also know that having it in a box in the basement is not a good idea.
Surely there must be another question or two out there. Who can we encourage to ask? Aha, Benjamin.
Hi, so I just have a quick question about in terms of if you have any advice for sharing once this material has become digitized, in terms of sharing it within, not making it fully public, but having it accessible just among particular parties, in particular among a particular religious order, if you have a recommendation for something that's not fully public, but also isn't fully just siloed at the institution.
Yeah. So with that, you can kind of create an internal, digital library where, maybe only internally, what the link is, the website link to it, or it's password protected, or also, maybe utilizing Dropbox or OneDrive to share, especially if everybody sort of, you can identify what parties need access to it and, give them permission to go into that folder. Because especially if it's internal, you might not necessarily have to make it, fancy and making it look like a digital exhibit. You're just providing the images that sometimes, OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive is great, but also with those things that's just sort of an access component, not necessarily a preservation component.
Great, thank you.
And then I see a question, is there a database, a CMS that can be used for external access and for separate internal organization only access? Yes. I would definitely say, depending on what your content management system is, most content management systems that are third party can create that for you. They can create an internal organizational access and also external access. For example, at Villanova, our digital library, the back end is internal use for all staff. And then we click a button that it is publish, that publishes into the digital library for the public to see. And we use an open source at-home built Fedora storage, on top of it, our own created user interface. Michelle asks, what would you recommend doing first, getting funding or planning first? I would say planning first, because planning first helps you figure out what you need to ask and who you need to ask, especially if you're asking funding in terms of applying for a grant. You've done all the work already to apply for that grant. Also, maybe you're working with an institution that has never done digitizing before, or they're hesitant to sort of go that route. Having it laid out first sort of kind of removes a lot of questions and hesitancy. So I always recommend planning first. I say that also there are collections that I've created project plans for that haven't gone anywhere because they haven't gotten the funding to do. So that happens sometimes. Any ideas where one could find funding for digitization projects? Yes, the NEH annually does hidden collections grants where you can apply for your collection to be scanned, as well as many states also have a similar program where you can apply for a state grant to scan, to get support scanning or provide, creating an access. And then Annalisa, yes, in my experience, some preliminary planning will be needed to advocate for funding. Yes, 100%. Also, you're having conversations to funders that don't know how much is involved in digitizing. So having that all laid out beforehand and given to them, one, makes the project realistic, and then also kind of helps you itemize why you're asking for some money and where is it going.
Excellent. Well, our hour has just about expired, and I want to say thank you to Beaudry. Indeed, your presentation has shown us just how complex digitization projects are, but how you can overcome those complexities through planning and preparation. And I really appreciate all the insights that you've shared today. Some have asked if this recording will be available, and I will put the link to this recording in the ARCS group community page. And if others don't find it there, just give me an email and I'll be glad to share it with you directly. So once again, thank you, Beaudry. I look forward to hearing from you in the future as you continue to teach in this area that you love so much, and to network with you. I'm sure a lot of people here will be sending you emails for help or advice, and that's something. I mean, come on, archivists are very collaboration minded, and so this is a good thing. Thank you to ARCS for wanting to host this. And again, pay attention to the listserv for ARCS. You'll see some other great workshops coming up, and more talent that we can share across the internet, and hopefully also someday live in person. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me have a bad case of Technology Mondays. I appreciate you all waiting and your patience. Thank you.
Bye-bye.